Good afternoon. This is Pat O'Connell from the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, opening a special open meeting. It's an informational section for seasonal readiness of the utilities. I've learned that I need to make the distinctions for the IOU utilities. We don't have the co-ops here today, but we'll get that next time. And then with me is Commissioner Aguilera and Commissioner Ellison. So we have a quorum of the commission here. Again, this is an informational session. So goal is informal for us to learn utilities to communicate to commission and surprising number of people that watch on YouTube. So anyway, I'm glad everybody's here. Thank you for coming. Start with, we've got an agenda that was posted. Is there any issues with the agenda? Would you like a different agenda, Commissioner? Okay. It's pretty simple. So we'll proceed with the agenda, and we're gonna have public comment, and then presentations by the IOUs, and then a Q&A session. So Patrick, do we have anybody registered online for public comment?
Mr. Chair, we do not.
Thank you. Do we have anyone here who would like to provide public comment? We've got Jim Desarjan. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And for those of you in YouTube, we are having a bit of technical difficulty, so apologize for starting late and then don't have the cameras up. So floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chairman O'Connell, Commissioners Aguilera and Ellison. My name is Jim Desjardins. I'm the Executive Director of the Renewable Energy Industries Association. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some brief comments and for putting on the presentation today so that we can get a better understanding of the generation capacity of the investor-owned utilities in New Mexico to meet peak demand in the upcoming summer months. As we move forward through the transition to 100% carbon-free generation, the Renewable Energy Industries Association of New Mexico, also known as REIA, believes it is important to give consideration to all sources of generation. A newer concept that is being piloted in a number of utilities in the United States is to make use of behind-the-meter distributed generation facilities with storage to dispatch on demand. This concept has been referred to by many as virtual power plants. I think it should be named differently. The Brattle Group has an excellent report that suggests that such generation could be less expensive than gas peaker plants. In New Mexico, there are approximately 50,000 behind-the-meter solar systems. Unfortunately, only about 1% are presently coupled with energy storage. Assuming that a much higher attachment rate could be reached, REIA believes that these systems could contribute to the capacity needed to ensure a safe and reliable grid. We would hope that in the future, the Commission would give consideration to a pilot project. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. So we're going to move into the informational workshop section, and then just the genesis of this for me anyway was, the gas utility, New Mexico Gas Company does a gas supply plan in advance of the winter. They came in last fall and explained the preparations they had made for their upcoming critical season, which is the winter, talked through what arrangements they had to make sure supply was in place, talked through their overall outlook for price, knowing that winter bills are the highest. And so that led to thinking this would also be a good thing to do ahead of the summer with electricity. So that was the genesis of the idea. What we did was issue an order with a couple questions on it to talk through exactly those concepts, right? What's your readiness going into the summer season, which New Mexico tends to be the peak season for electric use? kind of outlook on price, knowing that summer hasn't happened yet, things might change. So it's not just what's going to happen when it's the hottest and loads are the highest, but kind of what kind of things might affect your bill as the summer goes on. So that was the idea behind all of this. Happy to see that you're all here in person. As Nancy pointed out, we ordered you to be here in person. So. But one of the things that just, as we're coming out of COVID, we're trying to figure out ways to share information with each other better. Personally, I believe that happens better human to human. So thank you for coming, especially as I say, the El Paso folks, always make sure Nancy buys you a good dinner when you're here. I know that's a schlep to get from El Paso to Santa Fe, so thank you. So that was the idea behind it. I'm very much looking forward to it. And then I'll turn it over to Commissioner Aguilera, Commissioner Ellison, if you've got any opening remarks. Anything else?
I don't have anything to add. I think that was well said, and that's why very interested to hear the preparedness for the summer, and same thing. Thank you all for coming, and I'm sure the El Paso people wanted to get out of the heat for a little bit, so thank you.
I'll just add clearly the summer resource adequacy preparedness is of utmost importance, and I think it's only going to become more important as we continue this transition from firm to variable generation plus batteries. So it's something we've really we all need to pay close attention to, and thank you for being here today.
Okay, so the agenda, the order we have is EPE, then P&M, then Southwest Public Service. We can rearrange that if EPE does not want to go first, but but if not, okay, you're welcome. And just the way the room's laid out, if you can come up to the mic, I'm not sure we've got our. Yeah, so anyway, you get to. The slides will be on the screen, but behind you. So if you need to have them advanced. All right, thank you. And does anybody in the room need copies? Because we've got. Wow. Okay, so you can't see it, but the slides are up. Gentlemen, could you just please introduce yourselves and then take it away?
Yeah, we need this for the video, right? Good afternoon, commissioners, Mr. Chairman, Jim Schiestel for El Paso Electric. I'm Vice President of Regulatory Operations and Resource Strategy. With me are a couple guys on that I'll let introduce themselves, Emmanuel Villalobos and Daniel Bell. Yeah, we're very happy to be here. I think we did this last year, right? And I think it's a really, really helpful exercise. We have a slide in here that talks about, I wanted to put in here about last year, just to demonstrate that, it's one thing to be prepared for your forecasted peak demand. It's another thing to be able to serve something that's much higher than your forecasted peak demand. And that's the way our summer was last year. We had 45 days in a row over 100 degrees in the middle of summer. We had no loss of load events or outages, at least not due to generation issues. Distribution's a different story when transformers get really hot. But so we have a presentation about our preparedness for summer. And as you said, it's very important. And in fact, it's pretty much all we do for the first 2 quarters of the year is get ready for summer. So I'll let these guys introduce themselves and then lead off on some of the slides, and I'll come in at the end. I think, yeah, that's
Emmanuel Villalobos, Market Director for Market Development and Resource Strategy at EPE. Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners, for the opportunity to be here. Wanna introduce yourself? Yeah.
Good afternoon, Daniel Bell, Manager of Energy Resources with El Paso Electric. I'm happy to see that the commission is as interested in our summer preparedness as we are at El Paso Electric.
Next slide, please. So this first slide is really just an outline of what we're the topics that we're going to try to cover here with you all. Our peak hour supply, planning reserves. We're going to get into a little bit of a discussion about our loads and resources document, and then some operational updates, and then we'll end with some talking points about market development, specifically REP. So next slide. This slide is, as Jim mentioned, it's one thing to, your crystal ball to forecast something. It's something else to actually meet your load, and it's just a testament to our operations group. Say anything else there?
No, we have here 135 megawatts over our forecasted demand. And that's almost 200 megawatts over the prior year demand. So it's really probably the most significant year-over-year increase in demand we've had in summer. And as I said, I think we handled it extremely well. And so the same type of preparation and preparedness that goes into being able to do that is what we do every summer.
That's right. So it's
I have a quick question here. We did have a presentation last year. Can you remind me what of the actual came from short-term purchases in terms of percentage, or at least ballpark?
So I don't know how the actuals in front of me, but I believe last year we were about 600 megawatts of purchases compared to what you'll see later on this year, which is on the order of 100 megawatts. And when we're saying short term, that's including all power purchases. So that's on the long-term day ahead in real time, but the majority of it in the summer is going to be your real time and your day ahead.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner, what's also different, is different from last year, of course, is we have new resources come online in between summer. So we'll talk about that.
So next slide. This slide is just informational in terms of what our resource mix will look like during the different peaks of the year. For our summer peak, you can see that all of our different resources are in play: solar, gas, nuclear, purchase power, and battery. For our winter peak, for the winter, we peak at nighttime. So that's why you see that solar is not contributing to our peak during that time. And our loads are not low enough in the winter that we don't forecast the need for any purchase power. Next slide. This is just a outline transitional slide of the different topics that we'll be discussing now that we get into a little more in depth on our planning outlook. So we'll be talking about our generation resources, purchases, our ELCC, if you all would like to talk about it. Next slide. So this slide is a representation of our monthly reserve margins. One of the important things to take into account here is there's two different points of view when you're looking at your operations or your planning. One is through a planning reserve lens, the other is through a operational lens. So they are different. For your planning, you're looking at about 10% for your planning reserve margins, as opposed to contingency, you're at 7%. So once we are within the year, so this is for 2024, once you're in year, we switch from that 10% to a 7%, and now we don't have it's a much shorter foresight on what we need to do. So within the year, we have a better idea of what generation is doing, what's going to be available, outages, things like that. So you'll see here, there is no red or negatives. We are covered through the summer. One thing that we do need to point out is we put these documents together right before the summer. So what you're looking at here is still representative of last year's this updated forecast for load. So this also shows Newman 1, Reel 6, and Reel 7 on an operational reserve in case they're needed.
Can you explain that 26 for July? That's on top of your planning reserve margin?
That is the planning reserve.
So that's,
That is
Oh.
contingency, I'm sorry.
yeah, I guess I'm just trying to stack the numbers in my head. You've got your forecasted demand. And then you only have 26 megawatts on top of forecasted demand.
Within the month, yes, that's what it looks like as for our peaking month, what we're forecasting now for our loads, that's what we are over.
Okay, and then how does that 26 relate to the 7% contingency reserves?
That is based off of what you need, the 7%, that's what the delta would be there.
Yeah, let me, yeah, I'm trying to understand this. So, let's say in July, you're projecting a peak of what, 2,400?
I believe we're somewhere in that area. No, 23.
23.
Okay, say 2,300. So, and if you include the 7% contingency reserve, you'd be at, say, 2,460. So is this showing you that you're above 2,460 by 26 megawatts?
Yes.
Okay.
So our next slide. As you recall, this presentation or something similar to it was done last year, and last year, one of the topics that was discussed was coming out of the 2021 IRP, there was I guess a shift in the way we had to look at this in terms of the multi-jurisdictional allocation. So in the past, we would only put together a system, loads and resources, but since then we're now providing or doing a Texas and New Mexico jurisdictional loads and resources document. Some topics to keep in mind or factors to consider here is that this multi-jurisdictional approach, though the procurement is done on a jurisdictional need, in actuality in operations, the dispatch is still done system-wide or as a whole.
Yeah, I guess I'm not seeing the jurisdiction split.
It's the next slide.
That's the next slide. Yeah.
So you want to do system first?
Yeah, I was just gonna, the system one is more just illustrative. Again, I was gonna mention that we put together this document somewhere around the summertime. It comes after our load and research team puts together their energy and demand forecast. So that's somewhere in April. So this year's document hasn't been created. We're working on it now. So what you're looking at here is last year's element. So we go to the next slide. This is where you see the New Mexico jurisdictional loads and resources. Again, this is something that we've provided in the past, so bear with me. I'll go through it really quick. Section 1 is the EPE owned resources, nuclear, gas, solar. Section 2 is our long-term purchase agreements, our resource purchases like our PPAs. Section 3 is our what we plan to acquire, what has either been identified through an IRP or an RFP, something that is not approved yet or contracted. Again, other factors to consider is that here we're dealing with the ELCC as part of the calculations. This is all done on a production cost modeling basis, and we are looking now as a loss of load event metric. We're moving from a 2 in 10 to a 1 in 10. We're staying at 2 in 10 through 2029. From 2030 and on, we're moving to a 1 in 10 metric. We do believe that 1 in 10 is going to become more of the industry standard, and we're seeing that as programs like RAP go underway, where they're meeting or requiring that metric of 10 and 1. 1 in 10, excuse me.
I have a question there. What is the reason for transitioning in 2029 as opposed to earlier?
I believe that came out of our IRP.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We'd have to get back to you on that about the timing. And just to be clear, what we're showing there in terms of resources in 2024 is their contribution at peak. Right, so it's not nameplate, it's under, and assuming the ELCC is their contribution at peak.
That is correct. We can go on to the next slide. Oh, one before that, actually. This slide, the resource adequacy, this shows just a quick update on our most recent builds and developments. You'll see the update on Buena Vista 1 and 2, which went operational July of 2023. Buena Vista 1 is a system resource where BV2 is specific to New Mexico. And then we have our Kearney project with an anticipated COD of May 2025.
And so the Commissioner Regular, this is what I was referring to in terms of new additional resources since last summer. We've got Buena Vista, the Buena Vista facility. And then in addition, looking at this from a total system basis, we also have our new gas unit at Newman Unit 6. So those are the additions from the differences, say, between 23 and 24 in terms of our available resources.
This next slide, we'll move over to Mr. Bell for the operation look in 2024.
Okay, so right now, what we're looking at for 2024, our summer peak, and this is coming from our load forecasting group, is 2338, and this is the most recent, just recently published. The 7%, approximately 7% contingency reserve on that would take us to a total obligation of that 2460, which you see at the top. Everything from there on to the bottom is going to be all of our resources that we're planning on using. These are all, again, estimated expected generation that is going to be available at the day of peak, right? So all of our Palo Verde generation is expected to be at full output nominal operations, so 622 megawatts from there. And then in terms of our total local generation, we're looking at a total of 1829, so 1,829 megawatts of generation. The newest additions are going to be Newman 6 with a expected summer peak capacity, summer peak output of 228 megawatts. As well as the Buena Vista 1 and Buena Vista 2 sites that Jim had mentioned before, which total about 120. But again, this is what is expected to be during peak hour, so from 5 to 6 p.m. So we wouldn't be counting on the full 120 output at that time. We do have a 40 megawatt system sale that is around the clock throughout the year, which is that New Mexico portion that is no longer allocated to the New Mexico jurisdiction. But in addition to that, we are expecting 100 megawatts of system purchases to give us a position or a margin above meeting our total obligations of 51 megawatts. There are some things that we would like to call out. Our expected peak demand is below the 2023 actual demand. And again, this is largely due to the fact that we had the unprecedented summer that we did in 2023. All of our weather forecasts are correcting for that summer that is, once in 30 years. The PV output is a little bit different from what we had last year, and that was due to a slight derate on one of the resources. We do have Newman 1, Rio 6, and Rio Grande online. Newman 6 is coming online. Our solar output, again, is going to be the projection based on our 2023 minus 5%, just to account for any kind of potential losses. And then again, we're only looking at 100 megawatts of purchases this year compared to around 600 megawatts of purchases from 2023.
And I'd point out here, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna ask, what are your plans in the event you have another unexpectedly hot summer?
Right. So we actually do have a significant amount of import capability. So this last line right above our position, our total imports, 682 is what we're planning right now. Historically, we are able to take that up to about 1150. So there are opportunities for us to import more power should our load increase because of another unprecedented summer or because of any unexpected force outages on the generation side.
And that's, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what we did last summer.
Correct. Right. And last summer, we really did try to find that limit just because of the unexpected summer.
Can I just clarify there with respect to the total imports?
Mhm.
Are we still talking about resources here, or are we talking about like transfer capability?
So we're talking, so it's kind of both, right? Because Palo Verde is an import into EPE's BA. So it's going to be transfers as well as our ability to import Palo Verde generation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So as commissioners, Mr. Chairman, I was going to point out, in terms of risks, you do have the summer issues that we dealt with last year. You may very well have to deal with again. And then, as you know, we have an abandonment application before the commission for Newman 1 and Rio Grande 7. Rio Grande 6 already has an approved abandonment. So all of that generation are 60 plus years. Each of those are 60 plus years old. We expect them to operate. We'll run them. We'll have them for contingency basis. And we ran them all last summer. But that's one of the challenges we have as we transition out of old resources into new generation.
And the 100 megawatts of purchases, is that a 24/7 block?
Yeah, great
Purchase?
question. So this is only expected for this one peak day, peak demand hour. When we're looking at, if you were to take out those 100 megawatt purchases, then you would see us at a deficient position, which would essentially mean that we would have to meet the same obligation with necessitating the 100 megawatts of position. But that, for the hours that we're looking at in forecasting, is a small percentage of the total hours needed. So that 100 megawatt purchase is not needed around the clock. It's only needed for those hours where our load is going, or our total obligations is going to be above the 2360.
How long would that, it would only be for a few hours a day, but how long would that period be? Would it be for a month that you would be doing that, or?
So the way that we typically do transact these particular purchases are generally going to be on either the day ahead or on the real time side. So the day ahead team will be looking at it and judging what hours we're going to need that 100 megawatts for, and then procuring that. And then on the real time, if there's any additional need for power from the wholesale market, then we'll go ahead and fill that need on the real time side. On the next slide, we will look at some of the expected market power and natural gas availability. A lot of these figures are coming from our summer Aurora production cost model, which our long-term or forward-term trader is the one responsible for putting together. So again, we're mentioning that we are expecting 100 megawatts of off-system sales power purchases on the day-ahead market. We are expecting power prices to range from anywhere from $60 to a megawatt hour to $160 a megawatt hour from the months of June to August. Again, these are forecasted numbers. Historically, we have seen prices aligned with this and then much higher depending on what the conditions in the West are in the bilateral market. We are forecasting to use approximately 240,000 MMBTUs of natural gas, which is aligned with what we have used in previous years. We have secured already 40,000 MMBTUs on a term basis, so April through October. And as we get to closer to our summer peak months, we'll be locking in other portions of that 240K need on a monthly basis, and then we'll continue to fill on the daily, either next day or same day, depending on what the needs are for a particular day.
When you say day ahead market, is that just the bilateral contract market?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So our summer gas price estimates, again, coming from the Aurora production cost model, are anywhere from 140 in MMBTU all the way up to 210 from the months of June to August.
So are those delivered prices?
You know what? I don't have that answer for you. I would expect so, but I would need to get back to you to confirm.
Okay. And then, one of the big topics in commissioner world right now is gas electric interface. And so they're mostly focusing on winter, but do you experience like scheduling problems for when you buy gas or deliverability problems in the summer?
Yeah, so in summer, typically not, right? We do have 220,000 MMBTUs of firm transport capability across our two pipelines, so Kinder Morgan or EPNG and One Oak. So that allows us to schedule a very firm product coming into El Paso. So in summer, it's not typically an issue. It was an issue very much so during the winter storm Uri that has impacted all of the supply, but it's not something that we see often in the summertime. We go to the next slide. Really the expected, so what are the risks? I think that was one of the questions asked in the order. And again, to your point, Commissioner Ellison, if we did have another unprecedented summer, that is obviously a risk that could impact not only the generation side, or so the demand side, but potentially the generation side. And I did mention that we do have plans in place in order to mitigate that. So relying on our import capability into our BA to supplement with any wholesale purchase power if need be. Our current gas prices are favorable, but if prices increase, this could also drive cost of purchase power. And this again could be any number of reasons on the supply issue, on the supply side of natural gas. Weather risk from hurricane season is also a risk for the gas supply. That is something to consider. And then again, just hot weather could create higher gas demand for natural gas that is ultimately needed to be procured, which is also why we take this portfolio approach when we're doing the gas tradings to make sure that we have a large part of what our expected demand is already locked in, and then fill as we need, but going in on a day ahead basis.
Then are these purchase power prices tied to gas, or do they?
They're very largely driven by gas, right? So all power prices are going to be highly contingent on the price of gas and the price of the fuel that it's using to be generated. So yes, the entire West is at the helm really of the gas market in terms of power prices.
As you pointed out, these gas prices are pretty attractive that we're experiencing now, that you're forecasting. Have you given consideration to the possibility of hedging for some of your needs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And El Paso Electric uses 2 storage contracts on our different pipelines in order to hedge against future increases in gas price, right? Well, we use it operationally, right, to have supply available in the case that there was anything, any issue on the supply side, right? This came in very handy in the winter event. We had these storage units available to us, but those are ways that we are currently trying to leverage in order to take advantage of the fact that gas prices right now are very favorable.
So a physical hedge, essentially. So you purchase the gas in the summer and then you,
Correct.
well, you purchase it when prices are good and you inject it.
Right, yes, there's no financial, we don't currently engage in any.
And what percentage of your summer gas demand do you typically try to store in that manner?
Oh, I would not know that off the top of my head. I'd have to look. It's a good question, but in general, though, that's a significant amount of capacity that we have on those two. So I believe it's 400 MMBTUs of storage, 400,000 MMBTUs of storage on our Kinder Morgan. And I can't remember off the top of my head on the One Oak side, but. The next slide is gonna go ahead and go back to Emmanuel.
So the next slide is, we've provided it before, we've talked to you all about it. It's our current market development timeline, where the left side shows some significant milestones that we've gone through. And the right side is what we're expecting or what we're forecasting. Again, the most important thing to keep in mind here is that these milestones are very fluid and contingent upon what our neighboring utilities do, the development or rolling out of different programs and the different markets. So I think the most important one here is that we are hoping to make a market decision, either Markets Plus or EDAM for the new day-ahead markets that are developing somewhere late 2025. So on to the next slide. Again, this was added here just as to serve as a talking point. If you all had any questions as to what our plans are for RAP from our perspective. Like I had mentioned earlier, the 1 in 10 loss of load event seems to be where the industry is moving in terms of that standard metric. So in terms of what we would anticipate if we were to join RAP, we're already heading towards that same type of metric. So we're already planning on that. We would expect that joining RAP, because of the way their program is set up, where there's that 7-month forward showing, and then there's the actual operational, and then there's a binding season. I would expect, if anything, it would accelerate our build timeline. We do think that it is important to have a standardization in terms of resource adequacy. We understand that Markets Plus has a requirement to go through RAP. We are planning to do those RAP studies. Hopefully this year, we're looking at maybe Q2, Q3, to start to see what impact it would have on our system, and further than that on our LNR and our future IRP and procurement process. So that's upcoming. We are in discussions with RAP, talking with their program coordinators and their data folks to see what requirements are needed so that we can design some study here. I don't know if you all had any questions for us. We're looking at it as the long and short of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So you haven't made a decision yet as to whether to join, but it sounds like you're making preparations should that seem to be the way you're going to go.
Yeah, so we're making that preparation, going in that direction to the 1 in 10 loss of load. That came out as a result of our IRP, but it lines up nicely with the fact that these are the same metrics that everybody else is going towards.
So it sounds like a consideration in joining, whether to join RAP would be whether joining them would require you to build more capacity, more generation capacity or not?
Yeah.
And so you're saying that as of now, joining RAP would require you to build excess additional capacity.
That it's a back of the envelope calculation. Again, we need to really do these in depth, but yeah, we would expect that we would have to issue more RFPs and accelerate that build schedule, because there is the benefit of the program is that it's resource adequacy, but it's steel in the ground. It's actual physical assets being built. So we would have to move up our timeline. Otherwise, you would face those penalties for not being in compliance with the program.
If we were to assume that it wasn't requiring you to build additional resources, and assuming, you were at the 1 in 10 standard, would you still find value in RAP in having that insurance policy essentially?
It would come down to a cost benefit analysis, but again, the benefit of the program is your diversity benefit. So there is an inherent benefit to joining, whether or not you would show surplus or deficient. There is a reliability benefit. It would be just in the systems and our BA, just for customers' best interest to increase reliability.
Okay, thank you.
Can I drill down on that a little bit more? So in terms, there was a comment about steel in the ground. And I'm just trying to really get a handle on what that means, because would you not be able to make a showing that you have acquired capacity, through a contract that isn't your generator?
That would depend on your timeline for when you actually join the program to when you're fully binding, and then you're in the forward showing phase. Our current understanding of the program is that once you get to the operational phase, it needs to be operational, where your resources need to be there. Otherwise, you would face rather steep penalties. And again, those dollars were better allocated in acquiring the resources.
Okay, and so just trying to get a better handle of, how you think about how much long-term generation you need to have versus the short-term purchases that you're making. And so, if we go back to slide 6, I think it's 6. This is the one that has the title Resource Adequacy and Summer Planning. It seems like so as you would expect, there is a pretty large difference between your summer peak and your winter peak. And so I'm trying to get a hold of whether this influences how much short-term resources you're purchasing. It looks like a typical curve that an electric utility has, but is yours like a bigger difference between the summer peak and the winter peak?
And
Compared to other utilities, yeah.
I would say we're pretty right in line with our neighboring utilities.
For summer peaking utilities.
Yes.
For summer peaking utilities, yeah. Okay, and so really the short-term purchase difference between this year and last year, like you said, is that you have steel in the ground.
And then also hopefully the differences in weather, we won't see, unlikely to see the same summer we saw before, but I think that ultimately that might start changing some planning assumptions and forecasting if we end up having summers that are that becomes the new normal. Right? That's, to me, that's one of the big risks here is the uncertainty around variations in the weather in summer. Because for us, at least, it wasn't a matter of it being that much hotter than a normal summer in El Paso in terms of the high temperatures, but how prolonged the period was. That really was the big difference.
Okay, thank you. And then I just wanted to, to ask if you could elaborate, and this isn't specifically to summer readiness, but there was an MOU that was signed with the U.S. General Services Administration. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I'll give you what I know. And it is really around the GSA's efforts for resiliency and renewables. And really are just an agreement on our willingness to partner with them on their goals with respect to renewables and resiliency. There aren't specific projects, I don't believe, identified yet, but it's more generally speaking, yeah, we want to work with the government on General Services Administration on forwarding their goals because they align with ours.
Okay, thank you for that.
So I just wanted to sort of wrap up a little bit and talk about it. I know you had on some of your questions, just, what we're processing or what we're considering in terms of where, commission orders or decisions or rulemakings or any of the other things. I'll just give you my general comments on that. Some of our circumstances really well. We talked about a little bit about, or I talked about, it's the age of some of our resources, right? And that we've already filed for abandonment of those resources with an expectation that we have this planning horizon where we're going to have new resources coming in. In the last, at least with the last several, they've all been delayed. They're either delayed because of the period of time we were in with respect to COVID and supply chain limitations, everything else. For example, our Newman 6 plant was delayed in construction, which is now online but delayed. The Buena Vista facility was delayed. Along with Buena Vista, we had planned on 150 megawatt solar facility Hecate, which is delayed. We have the Kearney issues. So along with this potentially rapid advance of need for resources, peak resources, we also have to deal with that sort of continuing, delay in adding resources. So that's one of my big concerns. And I think what I want to do and the company wants to do is to the extent we can to get further ahead of that process, to look further out and start planning for new resources further into the future. And I think that's going to be really critical, both for the planning for retirements and for the potential, at least, for pretty significant change in our load growth. There was mention of gas resources in New Mexico. Our Newman 6 unit, which we applied for a CC in New Mexico, was denied. And I'll tell you that an interpretation of that, at least with respect to that experience, was that new gas in New Mexico is going to be very difficult to get approved. And so we have to factor that into our planning around. I'm sure our IRP will say at some point in the future, you're adding gas to serve load. And so we really have to factor in, some of the, I think, interpretations of the REA that says new gas is really not consistent with the expectations of the REA. So we have to deal with that. And so that suggests, at least for New Mexico, you have more battery storage coming in. And that was an expectation anyway. But I think that this transition to, as was discussed earlier, this transition to 100% renewables and still having dispatchable generation, and how can you manage this transition, in my mind, really goes to that. That's going to be a big question for us, is what's the role of gas in this transition in New Mexico? Because we've made this same commitment, the 180%, 100% clean, over our entire service territory, so not just New Mexico. So we're addressing exactly this question in Texas as well. I think those to me are the risks, the unpredictable perhaps demand over summers because of climate change and weather. And, you know, having to transition not only from old resources to new resources, but the type of resources that we're changing. You know, there may have been a time when you just swapped old gas for new gas. And I think that's going to be a big consideration for us as well. That complicates it. I just wanted to call those out.
Any other questions? Then I propose we take a short break because we can turn the cameras on. So, but I think that it's going to require restarting the system. So for those of you plugged in online, you might see a brief interruption, but hang with it. We'll be right back up. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back. We've got P and M up next. And cameras, so good news. Everybody can see us. Welcome. Please introduce yourselves. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman O'Connell. My name is Mark Fenton. I'm the Executive Director of Regulatory Policy and Case Management at P&M. To my right is Brent Heffington. He's the Managing Director of Generation at P&M and will be doing the majority of the speaking today. Further to my right is Lori Williams. She's our Executive Director of Integrated System Planning at P&M, which is both transmission and resource planning, among some other things. And to my left, and likely to come up here probably and switch spots with me, is Steve Maestas. Steve is our Director of Wholesale Power Marketing at P&M. Our focus today, I'll just say a few initial remarks. First of all, as I always say, we really appreciate the opportunity for these kind of collaborative sessions like this. You know, ex parte rules in New Mexico are very strict, and just the opportunity to be able to talk to the commissioners and answer your questions is welcomed. Our focus in our presentation was really based on the questions that were asked in your order, your April 2nd order. We focused exclusively on that. And then I had a call from Ms. Amer. Commissioner Ellison had some questions related to RAP that he asked us to specifically address. So we've got a slide on that, and Lori's going to cover that slide. So we stuck to that script, and we appreciated Ms. Amer giving a heads up on exactly what you were interested in. So we'll be prepared to address all of that. And I'll address one slide. I'll have one slide on what we've been doing on stakeholder outreach and how we've benefited from some of the commission orders. I think we've actually been we've benefited from an order the commission had issued, and I'll talk about that. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Brent. Commissioners, does anybody need copies of this in the audience or elsewhere? Let me. There we go. So if we could advance to the next slide, please. Yeah, they're up. So, all right. So key points, the first one, P&M's prepared to meet 2024 summer peak load on seasonal operations. As we went through our analysis, it was apparent that we had a deficiency that we needed to take care of at a few hours on our peak day. So we did issue an RFP for just different energy products to try to cover that gap that we identified. So we did pick up 2 different products for July, and that's 150 megawatts and 100 megawatts in August. So we're still going through basically signature authority and things like that internally to P&M to get these contract signs. But we'll just leave it right there for now. These purchases for July, we've got 125 megawatts that are from hour ending 13 to hour ending 22. 25 megawatts in July is hour ending 7 to hour ending 22. And for August, we picked up 100 megawatts. It's hour ending 13 through 22. Along with procuring these contracts, our thermal fleet, every spring, we do go through different types of outages, whether they're, a short minor outage or major outage to work on different components. So our fleet has had several different outages this spring to get ready for the summer. Along with that, just like El Paso talked about, we will be looking at the hourly and day ahead markets as needs arise to try to cover any other deficiencies or contingencies that might come up through the summer. We'll also talk about, the summer fuel cost. They do appear reasonable, subject to some potential, risk of price changes, which we'll go through, and, including all system sales. And then, we'll talk about how the previous proceedings and assessments have contributed to our preparedness.
If you would, turn to the next slide, please. So if you see this peak load, this is the model that we've been currently working with, that our peak load would be 20,000 or 2,054 megawatts. This is going to be around the 18 or 1900 hour in July. You can see the bar line right there at 2131. That is the peak that we set last year in the P&M system. On the right side, you see our resource stack that we have available to meet that peak load. So nuclear, coal, natural gas, solar, wind, demand response, our batteries, geothermal, and then the 150 megawatts that we have purchased for the shortfall. Excuse me.
And again, you said that your peak last July is this 2131?
That's correct.
And could you say again the hours that these block purchases are for in July?
Sure. In July, we have 125 megawatts. That's hour ending 13 to hour ending 22.
Okay, and the same in August, the 13th.
Yeah, and there also in July, there's another 25 megawatt product that we have that's from 7 to 22. So a total of 150.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. So along with this, I will add that we do have, versus last summer, we do have 312 megawatts of battery storage that will be online that was not available last year. So next slide, please. This slide here is the off-peak planning period. This is hour ending 23. And you can see that on this slide there, with it being hour ending 23, there's no solar. There's also no demand response needed. And the purchases that we made, the 150 megawatts will not be valid at that time. So any questions?
And so would you have a strategy going into that hour 23 that you would want your batteries full, or what is your thinking around that?
I will defer the operational aspects of the battery there to Steve Mayaskis.
So typically, we have the capability to keep that charge and discharge a portion of it, but the way that we've been thinking through it is, I think there's probably a greater need, just the way our load starts to drop off, to probably discharge most of our batteries starting around hour 19, 18 or so through about 22. But we do anticipate that we're going to keep some of our charge into the off-peak hours, which will probably discharge a portion hour 23, and then as well as maintain a certain amount of charges to be able to balance the system at night, since we won't have no more purchases. And just to help with managing the wind variability and managing if we have any excess or wind, or there's over generation and under generation, we'll do a combination both for our power operations group.
So next slide, please. So with this analysis and what we put together, P&M has confidence we can meet the peak load requirements and manage our reliability commitments. Steve's group's very experienced and has demonstrated they're effective at managing, the increasing renewable penetration that we have on our system during the summer heat. He also has personnel that's attentive to the planning, the participation in the real-time and day-ahead market to ensure that we meet our planning horizon. You can infer that.
Relative.
All right. Next slide, please. And what we have here, the data pulled off of this is from our fuel clause reset that was filed March 14th of this year, and it became effective April 1st. So if you see line 7, those are the dollars we're anticipating that we will need for our purchase power expense and fuel. And this does cover the purchases that I talked about earlier, the 150 megawatts and the 100 megawatts, plus anything we anticipate we'll need in real time or day ahead. And the risk to this, of course, is, if you're in the day ahead or real time, it's pricing can vary based on supply and demand, natural gas price that day, things like that. So that's the risk to the fuel clause.
So you see the same kind of price.
Yeah, for the most part, with prices have been in that ballpark where they're projecting. But as we've seen in past summers, typically forward market prices tend to drop off once we get into the summer. So that's, I think, as Brent indicated, that's one of the potential risks in terms of off systems sales revenue that may not flow through, depending on how strong does market stay and how much we're able to make in off system sales.
And so the block purchases that you're planning on, is that something that, are you locking in that pricing now, or you have already?
We're going through the process of getting all the signatures on the contract to lock that price in, yes.
But
Okay.
those are fixed price
It'd be
purchases.
fixed price.
Fixed price, so
Correct.
you're not taking a gas price risk on those.
No.
No.
Right.
All right. Next slide is for Mark.
Yeah, I wanted to just talk for a second about a couple of things that are in place that I'm not sure if you're aware of or not, that I think has helped us in our current preparedness, which was one of the questions. We file bi-monthly reports. It used to actually be monthly reports, but we're filing now, it's every 2 months. We'll file a report with the commission. There's a whole series of questions, some of which came from the previous commission, and I think you may have added to it at some point. But we answer questions related to L&R table, status of San Juan and Palo Verde replacement resources, and provide other resource adequacy updates. So, if you're ever wondering where PNM is, you can go back and look at those reports because that's filed with the commission. The other thing that was initiated quite some time ago was, at first it was ordered. We don't feel like we have to do it anymore, but it's been extremely beneficial to us, is we hold biweekly meetings with our stakeholders, which includes commission staff, the AGs, most of the people that are active in our resource cases. We have meetings every 2 weeks. Sometimes we get a good turnout, sometimes not that many people. But during those meetings, Brent usually provides a update on resource adequacy and where we are. We also leverage those meetings to talk about upcoming filings that we're going to have, solicit input from them related to the filings. We've been able to incorporate a lot of their input. So I think we've done a lot better job here the last year and a half, 2 years on soliciting input from our stakeholders. And that was initiated by the commission. And we've just stuck with it because it's been very helpful to us.
Fortunately, those replacement resource updates kind of go into a strange docket that you really have to hunt for. So it's not your fault, but it's an issue.
I have gotten calls about that before. Which docket do I go to look to find that report? But I think people are kind of in sync with it at this point. So I'm gonna point that out. Lori, the last slide we have, I guess it's the last slide, is on the wrap update, and hopefully Commissioner Ellison has answered some of the questions you provided us in advance.
Okay, next slide, I think. Thank you. So I think what you'll see, Commissioner Ellison, is the questions that you posed. What we tried to do is just answer each one of those directly. So I'll start going through those. So PNM has joined obviously on a non-binding basis to RAP. The factors that PNM is considering in making a binding decision include what we'll call our BA readiness measures. So those include reliability considerations, regional alignment, which is particularly important in terms of RAP integrity, RAP effectiveness. And then the last one is our resource certainty. So both ability to get those resources that we procure online in time for the peak seasons, as well as going through our regulatory processes and having that assurance. So the Desert Southwest region, which is where PNM would participate, appears to be aligned to go summer 2027 binding. That will align with all the other Desert Southwest entities, we hope. And we are in non-binding. We're submitting data right now so that those adequacy calculations and that kind of thing can be going on throughout the preparedness for going binding. Transmission is the big driver in the DSW, getting value out of that, because as you know, 75% of the resources in RAP have to have firm transmission underpinning those exchanges. So that's a really important part of this, is having all those entities together and having that transmission assurance. There has been talk about pushing binding seasons out, but I think you are probably aware that many of the entities are attempting to put together a commitment letter that will have everybody go binding in the summer of 27. And if you do that, there's the potential that we will have discounts to the penalties for the first 4 operating seasons to really try to garner interest, because I know there's still a lot of uncertainty with entities in terms of resource certainty for various reasons. Okay, when does PNM anticipate that RAP will go live? So again, anticipating summer of 27, we do have one entity whose commission has ordered a delay of their binding season until the winter of 27. So that's Nevada. I think you're probably most aware. Barring any unforeseen issue, we are planning to go down that road, but of course we will know that by May of 2025. So you make those commitments 2 years out. How important is participating in RAP in PNM's resource planning process? So RAP, for those of you that aren't familiar, RAP has 2 aspects to it: the operational program and a forward showing program. That operational program will be immediately impactful to our near-term or operational resource planning, because it is, like you talked about, an insurance policy in those real-time operations. It will also have the impact of assisting with longer term planning or planning reserve margin. And that really is going to come through operational experience and some certainty over time. As we gain success in operational experience, and that we're hopeful that, again, because we go across a much larger geographic footprint, that our ELCCs will be able to increase slightly, and that we will have a non-coincident peak with some of our neighbors that are participating. So we get that sharing of benefits. And 2027, we think, is going to align with the timing of our expected day-ahead market regional participation as well. And that is all I have for you today. But certainly would take your questions.
Appreciate that. Would you expect that participation in RAP would require you to build generation resources above what you would otherwise intend to have?
I'm hopeful not. I think to start, and especially we are expecting to go through another load forecast update soon. Based on what I'm hearing from other entities and internally, our load forecast is expected to rise over the next few years. Given that, we will have to add resources to be compliant with a forward showing. So you need to go into those forward showings with an adequate amount of resource. And at the beginning of that, you won't have seen that decrement off what's required in your planning reserve margin as the program is getting started. But eventually over time, I hope we will realize those benefits, but I don't think specifically for RAP that we would build resources. I think it would be so that we could be compliant with the forward showing, meet that, and then as we go forward, as we have incremental load growth, the potential to have to add resources, we hope will go down.
So it sounds like hopefully RAP is not gonna ask you to do something that you would not have done
Right,
anyway.
yes.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Can you remind, is the forward showing 100% 7 months in advance?
Yes, so you have to have your reserve and they will set the reserve for you. But based on the planning reserve margin, it's really underpinned by a 0.1 LOLE, which aligns with how we're planning our system right now. So I would not expect there to be a big difference at the beginning of that. But again, it will decrement down as we have the broader footprint. The effective planning reserve margin should be able to drop over time.
Right. And then another benefit of REP is that before the forward showing is due, there's also the it seems like it facilitates the ability to transact with other utilities that might have excess.
That's correct. I think we have that today, but certainly will not hurt the process.
Okay, thank you.
And is RAP requiring a 0.1 LOLE?
That's what underpins their planning. That's correct.
I'll just ask you the same question I gave EPE. Are you seeing gas electric interface issues for the summer? Or is that an issue at all? Or is it a winter? Or are you getting gas scheduled when you need it?
It's probably more problematic in wintertime, but in summertime, it's when during those hot parts of the summer when there's a lot of gas being burned in Arizona and California. And the pipes, maybe there's not enough procurement in the day ahead, maybe for unforeseen reasons that the pipes could run low, that they have COCs or concerns where there's penalties, severe penalties if you overburn. I don't think we saw it too many times last summer. I think everybody came well prepared, but there's potential for some of that. But typically it's the wintertime where we tend to see more issues and concerns with pipeline capacity constraints. Yep.
So we have an extra sheet at the back, an appendix, just that has assumption and operating plan details. That we don't want to look at the details here, but they're available to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So welcome to the table Excel and Mr. Elzey. I don't want to disrespect your travel from Denver, so just because
Thank you.
I've driven to El Paso quite a bit, so I know what that drive's like, and that's top of mind. But
I will take him out to a nice dinner tonight for making that trip. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Zoe Lees. I'm the Regional Vice President of Planning and Policy for our Southwestern Public Service Company. With me today is Ben Elsey, Director of Resource Planning for Excel Energy, with his focus on Southwestern Public Service Company. It's a special treat to have Ben here with me today. He's moving on from the company and taking a new, really exciting opportunity for himself next month. So this will be my last chance to present with Ben today, and I'll just take the opportunity to say that thank you to Ben in this public forum for your service to SPS during the IRP, especially this past year, and for all the stakeholder engagement that you did in our communities. and with our customers, and so that we can bring forward a really good plan to the commission. If you could go forward a slide or two, I think, yeah, one more. So SPS is proud to serve approximately 126 customers in Southeast New Mexico. And obviously we have customers in the Panhandle of Texas as well. Ben will discuss today our resource position for this summer. And that position does show that SPS is long by 176 megawatts. However, I want to emphasize that SPS is not long for long. This is something that you've heard quite a bit over the past year. You know, we're not long for long, given the prospect of increasing planning reserve margins at the SPP, an aging generation fleet that will be retiring off the system, and an increasing load growth on our system as well. So as we look to maintain system reliability and continue to serve the economic growth in our service territory, we appreciate the opportunity to present our summer resource readiness to you today, but also look forward to continued discussions around reliability as we execute on our current integrated resource plan action plan. So thank you for the opportunity, and Ben, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Zoe. So maybe just piggyback on Zoe's comments before we move on. It's not just SPS, that's not going to be long for long. That's the same across the SPP. As we stand today, the Southwest Power Pool has an actual reserve margin of about 20%, so 20% accredited capacity over our need. If the SPP was to build no new generation, which is an unlikely scenario, the SPP would be short, would not be able to meet SPP's load by 2027. So most of the load responsible entities within the SPP are seeing the same situation we are. If we go to the next slide. We did include just a map here, just in case you had any questions on individual generators, we could maybe circle back to this slide. I will preface this slide and say, we included this in the presentation to match our IRP filing. This slide is slightly out of date. This does include some of the gas steam units that we are due to retire, or have retired, I should say, plant X1, 2, and 3, and Cumberland 1. So the numbers here are slightly inflated by about 200 megawatts. If we go to the next slide. So as we alluded to, SPS is a member of the Southwest Power Pool, and it is the SPP who set the resource adequacy requirements for all of their members, including SPS. So unlike El Paso and PNM today, when we kind of talk about our resource adequacy preparedness, we're really looking at how we meet SPP's rules for resource adequacy. The big requirement, of course, is the plan and reserve margin requirement. The SPP currently has a 15% year-round PRM requirement. That is set on a loss of load expectation study that has the 0.1 day a year metric. I will talk a lot in future slides on how that's going to change going forward. But just to set the scene, we are currently using an LOE metric. I expect the SPP are going to move to an EUE metric, so an expected unserved energy requirement in the near future. So at the moment, the 0.1 LOLE is a measure of how often a loss of event load is going to occur. When we move to an EUE metric, we're going to be looking at kind of the magnitude and the size of that event. So if we go to the next slide. So in addition to setting the resource adequacy requirements, we obviously are part of the SPP integrated marketplace. So SPS bids all of its generation into the SPP, and the SPP dispatches not just SPS's generation, but the generation for the entire fleet. So when we start talking about market energy price forecasts, we're not able to produce kind of like an old-fashioned resource stack where we just show our own generation fleet. We're looking at the entire balanced authority. If we go to the next slide, we can kind of get into the SPS specifics. So here is our 2024 loads and resources table. So our projected peak demand for this summer
is just shy of 4,400 megawatts. As we stand today, as I mentioned earlier, we have a 15% planning reserve margin requirement. So the planning reserves on the 4,400 megawatt load is approximately 685 megawatts, 684 megawatts. As we stand today, we have around 5,400 megawatts of accredited capacity. So that's slightly less than what I showed on the previous slide. This is because of some of the gas steam retirements. So currently we're 176 megawatts long, or we have 176 megawatts of accredited capacity above our planning reserve margin requirement. That number is still subject to change. So in order to validate our resource adequacy position, we submit a resource adequacy workbook to the SPP on February the 15th of each year. That's the initial pass. The SPP then review the resource adequacy workbook, and we make any corrections and file a final resource adequacy workbook on May the 15th. So currently we've kind of done that first draft. It shows us approximately 200 megawatts long. There's still some open items which may take us down to 176. We won't know our final position though until mid-May.
Just asking as an RSC member, do you have any observations on that workbook process?
It's improved greatly this year. They changed the software package. To be honest with you, the prior years were dreadful. It was the worst software package to try and complete. They've streamlined it. It's actually pretty efficient now.
Okay, so submitting it got easier. And then
Yes.
I'm also thinking about the timing of it, you know, because they're issuing operation alerts this past week.
Yeah.
It's because you've got this narrow window where everything goes into maintenance. And so then if it's not windy, you'd be.
Yeah,
So
and I'm gonna.
wondering if that's a workbook reform question or if there's a different.
I think it's more of a policy and process question, and I've got a slide coming up.
Oh, you're. Oh,
Yeah, and in fact, I think I'm there right now. So if we go to the next slide. Since the SPP set our resource adequacy requirements, I think one of the questions was kind of how prior cases, prior discussions, prior presentations has impacted how we approach resource adequacy. Considering we're doing this on a SPP balancing authority, I kind of took a twist on that question and showed some of the changes that SPP are proposing in the near future that will impact resource adequacy across the BA. So the first one is in front of FERC right now, and that's the implementation of effective load carrying capability for renewable resources and energy storage resources. And Chairman O'Connell, to be very precise here, because I know we've discussed this in the past, energy storage resources are particularly talking about 4-hour lithium-ion batteries, the way it's currently worded. ELCC, we have been planning for a number of years. Every year when we go to submit our resource adequacy workbook, because it's not been approved, we revert back to the old methodology. So currently we get around 30 to 40 megawatts additional capacity under the old methodology. When ELCC gets implemented in probably 26, if it gets approved in FERC, we'll see a drop off in some of our accredited capacity. In addition to the ELCC filing at FERC, we also have performance-based accreditation for thermal resources. So everything we've talked about today has been based on what we call an ICAP basis, an installed capacity basis. So if you have a thermal generator and it tests for 100 megawatts, you get to count 100 megawatts towards your planning reserve margin requirement. As we go forward, what the SPP is really focusing on is how reliable is that individual unit. So if that unit has a 5% historical forced outage rate, the accredited capacity of that unit is going to be discounted by 5%. So that 100 megawatt generator will become now a 95 megawatt generator for the purposes of capacity accreditation. Likewise, if a generator had a 20% forced outage rate, it would be given a 20% haircut. So really what we're trying to target within the SPP is individual generators and improving reliability for each of our members. There's been several questions today on fuel availability. We, in not just SPS, but across the SPP footprint, typically see fuel assurance issues in the winter events. So generally speaking, it's not such an issue in the summer. In order to address fuel assurances during extreme weather events, thinking Uri, Jerry, Elliott, there are some potential new rules within the SPP. And what they're going to look at with the thermal generation is its performance during the top 3% of net load hours in the winter season. So I mentioned earlier a hypothetical generator that had 100 megawatt nameplate capacity and a 5% forced outage rate. In addition, how did that generator perform during these extreme winter events? And if we start seeing a history where a particular generator performs poorly, then that would decrease the accreditation.
Mr. LC,
Yes.
I have a question, and this is going back to the performance-based accreditation. So is that calculation based on the generator's entire history, or is it like going back like 1 year or 3 years or anything like that?
Eventually, it's going to be a 7-year historical look.
Okay.
There is kind of a phase-in process where we use class averages until we have historical data, and then we blend into the actual unit generation.
Okay.
And then some other changes just to kind of bring to your attention here. We have the changes to how demand response programs are accredited for capacity purposes. A potential big one coming up is further changes to the planning reserve margin requirement. As I mentioned earlier, we're currently at 15%. SPP are proposing internally an increase to 16% in the summer. So all else being equal, that will mean SPS needs approximately 45-50 megawatts of additional accredited capacity. And then finally, considering the issues during winter events, SPP is looking very strongly at resource adequacy during the winter season. And we expect to have a separate PRM for the winter season compared to the summer season. Early indications are that winter PRM will be in the mid-30s, so somewhere in the region of 33 to 36%. So in addition to kind of the proposed changes that we've just discussed that are going to impact SPS's capacity position, we also have significant load growth on the system. So the combination of load growth, changes to the PRM, and changes to renewable accreditation all create uncertainty when we're looking at our resource position, our R&R position. So whereas in the past we were able to pretty accurately project how much capacity we need, going forward, it would be reasonable to allow just a little bit more headroom to ensure we aren't suddenly caught short by one of these changes impacting our position.
What peak load are you projecting for your system this summer?
For this summer, it's actually shown on the loads and resources table. Our retail load is 4,303 megawatts. It's on slide 7. And it's shown on the line gross retail. And then we do have 100 megawatts of wholesale load that's still left on the system and drops off in 2026. The negative adjustment there is for demand side resources, rooftop solar in demand response.
And that 4,300 number, that's going to be sensitive to weather?
It is, yes. That's a weather normalized number. So if we see an extreme summer, we would expect to see that number increase.
Okay. And how prepared do you feel for that? Should you see a hotter summer than average?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've got 176 megawatts of additional capacity right now. In addition, we have import capability across the SPP tie lines of about 1,900 megawatts. Now, we do have to keep enough room on those import transfer capabilities for our single largest contingency generator. So realistically speaking, we're 1,300 to 1,400 of import capability. So we should be in a good position, even if we do see an extreme summer. That's why, Commissioner Ellison, as I start this conversation, I mentioned SPP's capacity position. Right now, there's ample capacity across the SPP, but as we move to the middle of the decade, we're going to start seeing a pinch if it's a hot summer. There's not going to be the amount of reserves just across the footprint.
And the existing resources you've outlined here, those do not depend on those ties with the rest of SPP. Those are within your footprint.
Correct. These are all either SPS owned generators or long-term purchase power agreements.
That reflects what was under the workbook.
Correct, yes. So if we now go to slide 9. Again, as I kind of said at the top of this conversation, it's difficult for us to project energy prices from a resource stack. So we felt like the most accurate projection would be to look at last summer and to see what the LMP prices were last year. So what we see on this graph here is our real-time LMPs, so not day ahead. These are actually kind of realized pricing on 5-minute increments. And this was the average for June through September. So as we look at the chart, in June, our average LMP was just shy of $25 a megawatt hour. It peaked in August to just below 38 and then came back down in September to 24. So the average over the entire summer was just shy of $29 a megawatt hour. Now, again, just to be clear, these are marginal prices. So this is the next incremental megawatt hour, the cost of the next incremental megawatt hour, not necessarily average energy prices. SPP is extremely wind heavy at the moment. I think we set a record last year or the year before with somewhere in the region of 23,000 megawatt hours of wind at one point in time. So obviously either zero cost wind or even negative $35 with the production tax credit. So we have a large base there. So what you typically see on these LMPs is the incremental cost of gas generation. And if we go to the final slide, these are the potential risks affecting the energy costs. Obviously, fuel prices is the big one here. Our projections are somewhat aligned with El Paso's earlier, kind of those $2 range per MMBTU. SPS, though, is somewhat unique. We do serve, obviously, the Permian Basin, and we do occasionally see very, very low natural gas prices. In fact, this week, I think we set a record of seeing very negative prices in the region of negative $4 an MMBTU. And that's just the result of too much gas being produced and not being able to export through the pipelines down to the Gulf Coast.
Do you dispatch your gas units in that situation?
Well, the SPP will, yes. Yes, they will base it on those fuel costs.
So whether, oh, okay, SPP is dispatching, so they're gonna notice that, and they're gonna dispatch gas as much as they can in that sort of scenario.
Correct, yes. The next risk is renewable energy production. As I mentioned earlier, the SPP is very heavy, dependent upon wind generation right now. On the high end, as I mentioned, it was 23,000 megawatts. However, there was a time last year where we saw wind in the entire SPP footprint of around 100 megawatts. So obviously, as we see low wind penetration, we're going to see higher energy prices and vice versa. Demand is another risk impacting projected energy costs. Obviously, Commissioner Ennison, you mentioned earlier, an extreme summer. As temperatures increase and demand increase, we'd obviously expect to see those LMPs increase as we go through kind of less efficient generators in the resource stack. And then LMPs are a combination of marginal energy price, marginal congestion cost, and marginal line losses. So in addition to the cost of producing energy, we also have to look at congestion patterns on the system. So if we continue to see lots of growth in a geographically isolated area such as Southeast New Mexico, and we don't have necessarily the transmission infrastructure in place to get the power down to that area, we could see higher costs. So there's the congestion. And then finally, potential for environmental compliance costs. We don't really necessarily foresee that coming into this summer, but with potential rules like Good Neighbor Rule and other environmental legislation, that could see us either changing the dispatch order of our units or have an additional cost for environmental compliance. And I believe that is our last slide, so I will happily answer any questions you may have.
So are you seeing changes in the interconnection queue? I mean, it was reported to me by SPS a few months ago that it just seemed like things had slowed down on being able to interconnect both generation and load. So I was just wondering, get an update on that.
Yeah, so I'll handle those two maybe separately. On interconnecting new generation, it is still backlogged. Right now, the SPP is working through the 2018 DICEs, 2019 DICEs. So 5 to 6 years just for a new project to understand what its transmission network upgrade costs are going to be. That's extremely challenging when we come to look at getting new generation online. There have been some improvements. The SPP did increase the cost for staying in that queue, so there's more skin in the game. We did see some improvements there, but certainly after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, we saw a lot of renewable developers obviously enter the queue and expect that to maybe slow it down again. In terms of interconnecting load, again, that's also been a little bit slow from the SPP side. We are working with SPP to try and speed that up, but we certainly have looked at our load forecast for coming into this summer and going into maybe next summer and reduced it slightly. Now, that isn't because the load's gone away. We still expect that load to come online. We just expect the load to be maybe 26, 27 after we can get through the SPP AQ request delays.
Thank you. Questions? I mean, I really appreciate the contrast too between your situation versus PNM and El Paso. So that's one of the things that I like about getting all of us together for one thing. Okay, so next on the agenda is we have a Q&A session. I guess you guys can ask questions of each other, or does anybody else have? Do you have any questions you didn't think of for El Paso before we got to here? Lori Williams has questions for everybody.
Well, I was just gonna ask, are you guys changing your weather norm from the 20-year, 10-year? How are you on your weather normalization for your forecast?
But first, I'm not sure if we've changed it yet, but we've certainly looked at potentially reducing it to 10-year. So historically, I think we would do the 40-year look, and then obviously with the extreme summer events, we've been looking at.
Okay. I think we're at a 20 going to the 10.
Yeah, that's where you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah, so the question was about what's your weather norm for forecasting, and sounds like the trend is going from 20 or 14 down to 10.
And the reason for that would be that you're seeing more extreme weather more recently, and so you don't want to average over a longer period of time.
Exactly. Yeah, the 20.
Patrick, is there any, I can't really see Zoom, are there hands raised or anything like that?
No, Mr. Chair, there aren't.
Okay. So, I mean, it's Friday afternoon of a long week, and everybody I think would rather be outside. Got a question from Jim here.
Inside.
No problem.
So I noticed, I think it was 2 of the presentations that they forecasted. Months were the hottest months on record. So I'm just kind of curious on that.
So what you're seeing in ours is our load forecast, our existing load forecast that we used in our IRP process that just completed. So it's dated. Our IRP process started in April of 2022. So we are getting ready to issue, I'm told, a new load forecast internally, which I hope will reflect where we were last summer and be a little bit more on trend with what we are hearing from our various new service delivery and in any of our load research, that the load is actually growing quicker than it was when the 2022 forecast was put together.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And I think EP also had the same type of forecast.
Sure. So what you're seeing for your 24 forecast is that 10 years where, so the one year 23 does have an effect on it, but it doesn't necessarily lead you into a higher 24 absolute, right? So what you're seeing from a 24 forecast is the trend, that 10-year trend, including the most recent high.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Jimmy reminded me of another question for the Westerners, I guess, is what's the hydro outlook for this summer? Did it snow? Do we have snow?
Bleak.
Bleak.
El Paso would like to know what hydro is. That's right, Rio Grande dries up, that time it gets to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I know it snowed in New Mexico. I just didn't, and I've seen that it's not a drought in California for the first time in forever, but I don't know if that said anything for Pacific Northwest. Pacific Northwest below number, okay. Yes, Mr.
Well, I just wanted to, Mr. Chairman, you had a couple questions we couldn't or didn't answer, so I thought I'd, in the interest of complete record, I'd answer. So there was a question on the timing of moving to the ALCC in 2029. That's basically our plan for transition to what we expect will be the industry standard. And doing that too rapidly obviously would change our near-term forecast for new resources. So it's really just our judgment in terms of transitioning to that standard by 29. The gas prices we showed include delivery. So to answer that question. And then our physical hedging on gas that Daniel talked about is about 18%. Of our needs, our summer needs, right? Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so I think where we're at on the agenda is closing remarks, including discussion of next steps. So how far out do you guys want me to get with next steps? First of all, just again, finish where we started. Personally, I get a lot out of this, so thank you for coming. I think it's valuable for the community to hear and know what's going on for the summer. So thank you for that. Trying to, we're asking about the next summer, but there was a lot of discussion and questions about the next 5 years, the next 10 years. So I think that was valuable too. And then I know we have this, because of a lot of this interaction is around adjudicated cases, we don't frequently have the opportunity to just talk big picture about lots of stuff. So that's another area where I appreciate it. Like, P&M, your biweekly calls, I think that's great. I don't think I can call into that. So anyway, it's nice to get a window into what's going on there every once in a while. So next steps sounds like a lot more optimism heading into the summer than we heard a year ago. So hope that's the right takeaway. And so my next step is thank you for the service and be safe out there. And then as things come up, let us know. And then I'll turn it over to Commissioner Ellison and Aguilera, see if they have any closing remarks.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. Well, first of all, in terms of next steps, I was going to suggest a 3-year action plan. Yes, he's looking to institute a link.
That was something that's the suggestion was a winter readiness, especially, that's, I think Mr. LZ characterized it very well. SPP, they're really focusing on the winter more than the summer. We're planning on having gas company come back, and so maybe gas and electric together for that might be an interesting check-in. So thanks for that suggestion.
Are you suggesting gas electric coordination?
I'm suggesting gas electric adjacency. But yeah, no, I don't know. Are they coordinated? But yeah, good suggestion. And then I don't know that we do this ahead of the peak season. I was wondering if you think it's worth it to do a report out of what just happened. I mean, some of you said what happened last summer to ground what you're talking about for this summer, in the fall. If you've got any, like big picture commissioner type things, like, I was asking about gas electric coordination. There really is at a national level a big conversation going on that. And And the three of us are involved in that conversation, at least at the level of hearing it. If we need to be actively engaged in it, that's the kind of thing that I'd love to hear from you. So anyway, good suggestion, and you just brought yourself an invite back. Any other comments, questions?
I just want to say thank you for summer readiness. I know that I feel better after this presentation than I felt before it. Thank you for preparing and for the transparency that you've provided to your plans. I think that's very beneficial. I think it's, not just beneficial for me, but for everybody else who's hearing it, and it's important. So thank you so much.
I'd like to also say thank you to everyone. It's been very beneficial for me to get an update and to hear how you're preparing and thinking about these issues. I agree with Mr. Fenton that we do have quite strict ex parte rules that make it tough just to have free conversations. And I think we should take advantage of opportunities to get together like this more often. Perhaps we're going to have another workshop dealing with markets, Western markets, that I think is going to be another forum for a good conversation. And I think there are other topics that we could think about as well that we would benefit from having a conversation about, and not just deal with them in adjudicated cases. So thank you for being here.
So now we've reached the point in the program where I dare my colleagues to object to adjournment. Hearing no objection, we're adjourned.